The rain poured endlessly, drenching the empty streets, thunder rumbling far away. Ruth Ellery stood at the doorway, her frail hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her sweater. Her breath came in shaky gasps as she looked at her only son, Paul Ellery, hoping for a sliver of kindness in his eyes. "Paul, please, can we talk about this?" Her voice was fragile, almost breaking. But Paul didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his fist clenched, and his eyes turned cold and distant, as if every memory they had shared meant nothing. Without a word, he grabbed her small, worn-out suitcase, lifted it with sudden force, and threw it into the pouring rain. The suitcase hit the wet pavement with a heavy thud. The rain splashed violently around it, as though the storm itself had turned against her. Paul's voice roared above the downpour, sharp and unrelenting. "You're nothing but a burden." Ruth froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The words cut deeper than the cold. Water streamed down her face, mixing with the silent tears she could no longer hold back. In that moment, 72 years of sacrifice, love, and motherhood crumbled into nothing. She stared at her son through the sheets of rain, searching for the boy she once held in her arms, but he was no longer there. The door slammed behind her, leaving her alone in the storm. Her hands trembled as she picked up the soaked suitcase, her heart hollow, her body numb. The night was cold, but the betrayal burned hotter than fire. The rain fell harder with every step. Ruth Ellery took her old suitcase, dragging behind her, scraping against the wet pavement. Her thin sweater clung to her shivering frame, soaked through to the bone. The cold bit into her skin, but the pain inside her chest was far worse. She walked without direction, without purpose, her feet sinking into puddles as the night swallowed her whole. Every streetlight she passed cast a lonely shadow on the empty road, a reminder that she no longer had a place to belong. Her knees weakened with exhaustion, her breath turning shallow as the storm raged on. Finally, her strength gave out, and she collapsed beneath an old stone bridge, clutching her suitcase like the last piece of her broken life. Ruth curled into herself, pulling her legs close to her chest, her wet hair sticking to her wrinkled face. The rain dripped from above, echoing softly in the silence of her despair. After 72 years of sacrifice, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling and hoarse, "This is how it ends, alone, invisible, forgotten." Her words disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the storm. The sound of passing cars above the bridge was distant, indifferent, like the world itself had turned its back on her. Somewhere deep inside, a small part of her still waited for someone, anyone, to notice she was still here. But the night gave her nothing, only the cold, the silence, and the memory of a son who no longer wanted her. The rain didn't stop. It roared like 1,000 whispers, slamming against the cracked pavement and drowning out the city's distant hum. Beneath the old stone bridge, Ruth Ellery sat curled into herself, her soaked sweater clinging to her frail frame, her trembling hands gripping the handle of her battered suitcase as though it were the only thing tethering her to this world. Every breath she took felt heavy, sharp, and hollow, the kind of breathing that carries not just exhaustion, but surrender. At 72, she had believed she understood pain. She thought she knew heartbreak, but nothing prepared her for this. The betrayal burned more deeply than the cold rain seeping through her skin. Her son, Paul Ellery, the boy she once cradled in her arms, the boy she nursed through fevers, the boy she sacrificed her dreams for, had looked her in the eye and thrown her out like a stranger. And for the first time in her life, Ruth truly believed she was invisible. Above her, cars rushed across the bridge, their headlights cutting through the mist, but none slowed down. No one saw her. No one cared. The city moved on, indifferent, leaving her behind. Tears blurred her vision, mixing with the rain until she couldn't tell one from the other. Her entire body ached, but her heart was the heaviest thing of all. She whispered into the darkness, voice trembling, broken 72 years of sacrifice. "And this is what I've become, forgotten, discarded, unwanted." The words hung in the air, fading into the sound of the storm. And then came silence, deep, suffocating silence, the kind that makes you wonder if the world has already given up on you. But sometimes fate waits for the moment when hope seems completely gone to strike. Because Ruth's story wasn't over. What she couldn't see, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that this night, this heartbreak, this storm was setting the stage for something far greater than pain. And if you think this is where Ruth Ellery's life ended, what if I told you this was only the beginning? The storm showed no mercy. Each raindrop struck like icy needles, but beneath that lonely bridge, Ruth Ellery no longer felt the cold, only the crushing weight of despair. Her breaths were shallow, trembling, barely holding her together. And then a sound. Footsteps, at first distant, faint against the roar of the rain, then closer, heavier, urgent. Ruth's eyes lifted slowly, unsure if she was dreaming or awake. And through the curtain of rain, a figure emerged, carrying the faint glow of a small flashlight cutting through the mist. Vivian Ellery, her younger sister, her last remaining family. Vivian dropped her umbrella, rushing toward Ruth without a word. She slipped off her heavy coat and wrapped it around Ruth's shivering shoulders, her movements sharp, protective, almost furious. Her eyes locked on Ruth, blazing with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Anger at the cruelty that had left her sister here, and heartbreak at seeing the woman who once raised her brought so low. For a moment neither spoke. The rain hammered around them, cars sped by above, but under that bridge time stopped. Finally Vivian whispered, her voice steady but laced with quiet rage. "Ruth, who did this to you?" Ruth's lips parted but no words came out. Her breath caught her chest tight. All she managed was a broken whisper, "Paul threw me out." The name hung between them like a blade cutting through the silence. Vivian's jaw clenched. Her fingers tightened around Ruth's shoulders, pulling her closer as if to shield her from the world itself. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a silent promise. Whatever it takes, she would not let this happen again. Vivian Ellery tightened her grip around her sister's trembling shoulders, guiding her gently through the sheets of rain. Without a single word, she led Ruth toward the car parked under a dim streetlight, the engine already running headlights cutting through the heavy mist. Ruth hesitated at the door for a moment, her fingers cold and stiff. Vivian noticed. She leaned closer, whispering softly, "It's okay, Ruth. You're safe now." Inside the car, the heater hummed softly, fighting back the damp chill that clung to Ruth's clothes. Vivian reached into the back seat, pulling out a stainless steel thermos. She unscrewed the lid and poured steaming tea into a small cup, placing it gently in Ruth's hands. The warmth spread slowly through Ruth's fingers, and for the first time that night, her body stopped shaking. She stared at the rising steam, her reflection trembling in the cup as tears quietly slipped down her cheeks. Vivian kept her eyes on the road, driving through the darkness, her jaw tight, her breathing steady, but her knuckles gripped the steering wheel like steel. She wanted to scream, to demand why, to ask how her own nephew could be so cruel. But she didn't. Instead, the silence became their language. The soft hum of the heater, the rhythmic patter of rain on the windshield, the faint clinking of Ruth's cup as her trembling slowed. For Ruth, this was the first warmth she had felt since Paul threw her out, the first sense of safety after endless hours of cold betrayal and heartbreak, when the neon sign of a small roadside motel finally appeared in the distance. Vivian exhaled slowly. She glanced at her sister, brushing a loose strand of wet hair from her face, and whispered, "We're almost there, Ruth, just hold on." And for the first time that night, Ruth dared to believe there might still be hope. The rain had finally slowed when Vivian Ellery parked the car in front of a small roadside motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a soft red glow through the fogged windows. Inside the car, the silence was almost unbearable, the kind of silence that carried every unspoken word, every unanswered question, every heartbreak that had brought them here. Ruth Ellery sat motionless, her wet hair clinging to her pale cheeks, her eyes fixed on nothing. The weight of betrayal still pressed against her chest, heavy and unrelenting. Vivian turned to her sister, studying the lines etched by years of sacrifice and silent endurance. Slowly, she reached over, placing a firm, steady hand on Ruth's shoulder. Her voice was low, but there was steel in it, a quiet strength forged from years of watching, protecting, enduring. "You're safe now," Ruth Vivian whispered, her tone both tender and unyielding. Her gaze didn't waver. "And I promise you they will never hurt you again." Ruth's lips trembled, her breath uneven. For the first time that night, she met her sister's eyes, and in Vivian's gaze, she saw something she hadn't felt in years: certainty. A promise stronger than words, louder than rage, deeper than fear. In that fragile silence, something shifted. The weight didn't vanish, but the darkness cracked just enough to let a glimmer of light seep through. For the first time in hours, Ruth closed her eyes and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a battle she didn't know she had the strength to fight, but she wouldn't have to fight it alone. The first light of dawn spilled into the small motel room, painting everything in a soft golden haze. Ruth Ellery sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly together, her swollen eyes still red from the night before. The silence was heavy, filled with questions she was too exhausted to ask. Then, without a word, Vivian Ellery walked over and placed a sleek, black folder on the table in front of her. "Open it," Vivian said softly. With trembling fingers, Ruth hesitated for a moment before flipping the cover open. Inside were neatly arranged documents, property deeds, bank statements, legal papers, all bearing Ruth Ellery's name. Her eyes scanned the first page, oceanfront property title owner, Ruth Ellery. Her breath hitched. She flipped to the next page, a bank account statement, $5 million US, all under her name. Her hands shook violently as she clutched the folder, tears welling up, blurring the words on the page. For a moment she couldn't breathe, it was too much to take in. "Vivian, what is this?" Her voice cracked barely above a whisper. Vivian's expression softened, a faint smile breaking through the steel in her gaze. "It's yours, Ruth. The Ocean View condo, the savings, everything. I bought the place for you, and the $5 million I've been saving for years. It's time you finally live without fear." Ruth's lips quivered, a disbelieving laugh breaking through her tears. It was the first genuine smile she'd had in years, fragile, trembling, but real. For 72 years, she had given everything she had to everyone else, and now for the first time, someone had given everything back to her. The sun poured into the brand new condo, filling every corner with soft golden light. Ruth Ellery stood barefoot on the cool marble floor, her hand resting lightly on the glass door. With slow, trembling steps, she walked out onto the balcony, where the vast ocean stretched endlessly before her. The salty breeze kissed her face. The sound of waves crashing against the shore carried an unfamiliar feeling, freedom. For a long moment, Ruth just stood there, breathing it in, letting her tears fall freely. After 72 years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and betrayal, she finally had something she had never dared to dream of before, a fresh start. Down below, the world seemed peaceful. The ocean glittered like diamonds beneath the morning sun. Everything felt safe. But deep in her chest, Ruth couldn't ignore the faint weight pressing against her heart. A quiet unease whispered through her mind like the distant rumble of thunder far beyond the horizon. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shake off the thought. Maybe it was just fear. Maybe it was just the memory of that stormy night. And yet, as the waves crashed harder, a haunting truth settled in the back of her mind. "I thought this was my second chance. I didn't know it was the start of another storm." The golden afternoon sunlight wrapped the luxury condo in warmth, but down by the security gate, the air was ice cold. A black SUV sat silently under the shade of the towering palms. Inside, Paul Ellery leaned against the window, his face shadowed, his jaw tight. His fingers tapped slowly against the steering wheel, steady, calculated. His eyes locked on the glass balcony above where Ruth Ellery stood, unaware, savoring what she thought was her safe new world. There was no smile on Paul's face, no warmth, only an edge, sharp, dangerous, silent. He reached for his phone, his lips curving into the faintest trace of a smirk, and muttered under his breath, "She thinks it's over, but she has no idea what's coming." A gust of wind rustled the palm leaves. The camera lingers on Paul's cold, unblinking stare as the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the pavement. Above, Ruth turned and stepped back inside the balcony door, closing behind her. She didn't see him. She didn't know, but the storm was already here. Laughter filled the air. Soft music played in the background as Ruth Ellery stood by the balcony doors, surrounded by neighbors congratulating her on her new home. The smell of champagne and fresh lilies drifted through the condo. For the first time in years, she felt safe. And then the elevator bell chimed. The doors slid open. Paul Ellery stepped out, followed by Marissa Ellery. Both dressed sharply, perfectly composed, their smiles polished, but cold, the kind that didn't reach their eyes. The room fell silent. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Ruth's glass trembled in her hand. Before Paul could take another step forward, Vivian Ellery moved. Calm, collected, but fierce, she planted herself between them and the crowd, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her eyes, cold as steel, locked onto Paul's. Her voice was steady, quiet, but laced with fire. "You're not welcome here." Paul's smirk deepened. He leaned slightly forward, his words slow and deliberate, almost venomous. "Oh, Aunt Vivian, we just came to celebrate Mom's big moment." Marissa placed her hand on Paul's arm, her fake sympathy dripping through every syllable. Ruth, darling, we were so worried about you. We thought maybe we could put the past behind us. Ruth opened her mouth, but no words came out. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost hear it crack. Vivian didn't move an inch. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the doorway, her body shielding Ruth. Her stare never wavered. And just when it felt like the silence might break, Vivian whispered, cold, sharp, and unyielding, take one more step, and you'll regret it. The camera lingers on Paul's face, his smile stiffening, his jaw tightening. The storm had officially arrived right inside Ruth's new home. The days after the party felt strange. The air inside Ruth Ellery's Ocean View condo was heavy, tense, like the calm before a storm. Paul Ellery arrived first, holding a bouquet of white lilies, his voice dripping with fake warmth. Mom, I was wrong. I just want to make things right between us. 2 days later, Marissa Ellery followed carrying a box of handmade pastries. Her voice was soft, careful, rehearsed. Ruth, we miss you. We're family. Can't we start over? On the surface, it was all tenderness and apologies, but behind their smiles was poison. The camera lingers on Paul's hand as he casually places a folder on the coffee table, pretending it's nothing important. Hidden beneath the pastries, beneath the flowers, beneath the sweet words, was a single goal: control. Ruth's life, her money, her freedom. Vivian Ellery wasn't fooled. She sat quietly in the corner, her gaze sharp, studying every word, every gesture. And when Paul and Marissa left, she whispered to herself, her tone cold, deliberate, all right, you want to play games, it'll play better. From that night on, Vivian began recording every conversation, saving every text, every voicemail, every piece of paper they touched. Slowly, quietly, she built a wall of evidence, preparing for a battle she knew was coming. The poison had been poured. But Vivian was ready to strike back. The next evening, Paul Ellery returned, this time with a leather folder tucked under his arm. He walked in wearing his warmest smile, yet masking the storm brewing beneath. Mom, he said softly, placing the folder on the coffee table, I brought something to protect you, something called a family wellness agreement. It's just paperwork, a simple formality. I just want to make sure you're safe. The camera slowly zooms in on the document as Paul flips the pages until it lands on a hidden clause. A single sentence written in small, delicate print, but carrying the weight of betrayal, granting Paul Ellery full control over all financial assets, properties, and future estate of Ruth Ellery. Ruth blinks her brows, furrowing as she struggles to understand the legal jargon. Paul's voice is smooth, rehearsed, persuasive, every word designed to lull her into trust. But Vivian Ellery isn't buying it. Standing quietly behind Ruth, her eyes sharpened like steel. Without saying a word, she discreetly taps her smartwatch, recording every second of the conversation. Sign it now, Mom. Paul insists, his tone turning slightly firmer. It's for your own good. Ruth hesitates, the pen trembling in her hand. Her breath catches, and then for a moment the room feels suffocating. Then Vivian gently places her hand over Ruth, stopping her from signing. Her voice is calm, but edged with fire. Not today, Paul. Not ever. The silence is heavy. Paul forces a smile, pretending to stay composed, but his eyes, cold, sharp, reveal everything. He gathers the folder, mutters under his breath, and walks out. Vivian watches him, leave her voice low but resolute, whispering to herself, all right, you made your move. Now it's my turn. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was war. Paul Ellery wasn't done. The failed family wellness agreement had only made him bolder and more dangerous. Late one night inside their dimly lit living room, Paul and Marissa Ellery sat hunched over the dining table, the sound of rain tapping against the glass. Spread before them, Ruth Ellery's financial documents, estate papers, in a single blank form. Marissa whispered coldly, if we can't make her sign, we'll make the bank believe she already did. Paul nodded, his jaw tight. With slow, deliberate strokes, he forged Ruth Ellery's signature, mimicking every curve and flick of her handwriting. Perfect, Marissa murmured, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. The next morning, Paul strode into the courthouse with false confidence, filing a petition for full financial guardianship over Ruth. To the legal system, it appeared Ruth had willingly surrendered control of everything: her money, her assets, her future. But that wasn't enough. 2 days later, Paul called Ruth's bank, his voice smooth and friendly. Hi, this is Paul Ellery. I need to add my name to my mother's account as a co-beneficiary. She's not feeling well lately, and we just want to make sure her finances are safe. On the other end of the line, the bank officer hesitated. "We'll need Ruth Ellery's signed authorization, Mr. Ellery." Paul smiled slyly, already holding the forged signature in his hand. "Oh, don't worry, I've got it right here." But what Paul didn't know, Vivian Ellery was already 3 steps ahead. Hidden cameras recorded calls and legal traps were quietly waiting ready to turn Paul's forgery into his own noose. The game had changed. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was fraud. The courtroom was silent. Every breath, every whisper, every rustle of paper seemed deafening. Ruth Ellery sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, her trembling hands clasped tightly together, while Vivian Ellery and attorney Grace Hollander exchanged a subtle, knowing glance. This was it. Months of betrayal, fear, and humiliation had led to this single moment. Grace rose from her seat, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, we have evidence that will dismantle this entire petition." From her briefcase, she placed a stack of documents on the table, sliding them toward the judge audio recordings of Paul and Marissa plotting to manipulate Ruth. Forged emails created to trick the bank into adding Paul as co-beneficiary. Forensic handwriting analysis proving the signature on the guardianship petition was fake. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the recordings began to play. Paul's voice echoed through the speakers. "Once I get control of her account, everything is ours." A ripple of gasps erupted across the courtroom. Paul's face drained of color. Marissa stared at the floor, her hands trembling. Grace didn't stop there. She presented timestamps, bank call logs, and digital forensics, tying every fraudulent move directly to Paul and Marissa Ellery. "Your Honor," Grace concluded firmly, "this was not concern for Ruth's well-being. This was financial exploitation, calculated and deliberate." The judge slammed the gavel. "Petition denied. Furthermore, this court will recommend criminal investigation into Mr. Paul Ellery and Mrs. Marissa Ellery." A stunned silence filled the room. Ruth turned to Vivian, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in years, her voice didn't tremble. We did it!" But Vivian's jaw remained tense. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "This isn't over. Not yet." The courtroom erupted into silence so heavy it almost felt alive. Then the judge's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Petition denied. All rights remain with Mrs. Ruth Ellery." For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The camera closes in on Paul Ellery, his jaw clenched, his face drained of color, his shoulders collapsing beneath the weight of humiliation. Beside him, Marissa Ellery's manicured hands tightened into trembling fists, her nails digging into her own skin as if trying to hold back her rage. On the other side of the courtroom, Ruth Ellery sat motionless, almost in disbelief. Tears welled up in her tired eyes, blurring the papers on the table in front of her. Vivian Ellery placed a steady hand on Ruth's shoulder, her expression unreadable, part relief, part vigilance, part quiet fury. Grace Hollander, the attorney, allowed herself the smallest smile of victory before collecting the scattered evidence from the table. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Paul's sharp breath as he tried to swallow his defeat. But beneath that stillness, the tension was far from over. Paul's fingers curled into fists. Marissa leaned in close, whispering something sharp and venomous into his ear. Whatever she said, it made his lips twitch into the faintest, coldest smirk. And Vivian saw it. She knew this wasn't the end. It was only the calm before the next storm. The camera opens on Ruth Ellery standing beside Vivian Ellery, both framed against the golden morning light. This time, Ruth isn't holding a suitcase or wiping away tears. She's holding a vision. The Ruth Ellery Foundation is born. The camera cuts through a montage of moments that feel alive with hope. Elderly women sitting in bright community centers holding warm cups of tea as volunteers guide them through financial recovery plans. A woman in her late 60s signing her name on a new housing contract, tears falling freely, finally safe. Rows of young law students, hands raised high as the foundation awards them full scholarships to fight financial abuse. A new legal support hotline, the phones ringing nonstop as trained advocates help elderly victims reclaim their independence. Ruth stands in front of a microphone at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her voice steady but soft, carrying the weight of her own scars. "For too long, I thought silence was strength, but I've learned that standing up for ourselves is the only way we rise." Vivian watches proudly from the side, her eyes glistening, not from sadness this time, but from triumph. For a moment, there is peace. For a moment, it feels like the storm has passed. But peace rarely lasts. The camera focuses on a small, brightly lit room filled with quiet anticipation. Dozens of women sit in a circle, their faces carrying stories of loss, betrayal, and silent battles. Ruth Ellery stands at the front, and her hands folded gently, listening. Suddenly, a woman in her late 60s raises her voice, trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Because of you, I fought for my rights." The room falls silent. Ruth blinks, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, the weight of everything, the betrayal, the storm, the nights under the bridge, comes rushing back. But this time it feels different, because now her pain has meaning. The camera slowly zooms in on Ruth's eyes shimmering under the soft light. A faint, almost fragile smile spreads across her face as she whispers softly to herself, "If my story can give someone else the courage to fight, then none of it was in vain." Vivian, standing nearby, notices the change in Ruth. She sees the strength replacing the sorrow, the way purpose has begun to heal her wounds. For the first time, Ruth isn't just surviving, she's leading a movement. But just as hope begins to bloom, shadows start to gather again. The camera slowly pans across the serene coastal skyline. Waves crash gently against the shore, sunlight spilling into Ruth Ellery's new apartment. She stands on the balcony, a soft breeze brushing against her face, her eyes closed as if finally breathing freely for the first time in years. A deep, resonant voice begins, steady and powerful. "They tried to erase me," images flash across the screen. Paul screaming in the rain. Marissa forging signatures, the cold courtroom battle. "But instead, I built something they can never touch." The shot shifts to the Ruth Ellery Foundation, women smiling as they receive legal aid workshops, buzzing with energy, and children laughing at the new community center. Ruth walks through the halls, greeted with warmth and gratitude. Her steps slow but steady, her presence commanding quiet respect. Vivian watches her sister from a distance, her lips curling into a proud, knowing smile. Ruth is no longer the broken woman under the bridge. She has transformed into a symbol of resilience. The music softens and the screen fades to black. But just before the silence settles, the camera cuts. Paul Ellery's shadow appears outside a lawyer's office, documents clutched in his hand, his expression unreadable. The storm isn't over yet. The sun sinks low, painting the ocean in shades of amber and gold. Ruth Ellery sits quietly on the balcony of her ocean view apartment, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The gentle crash of the waves below seems distant, almost muted as her thoughts drift into the chaos of the past months. Her voice, soft but unshaken, breaks the silence. "Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shows up when the rain comes." The camera lingers on Ruth's face, a mix of sorrow and strength, as flashbacks fill the screen. Paul's hand slamming the door, yelling, "She's a burden." Nights spent shivering beneath the bridge, alone and forgotten. Vivian's warm coat wrapping around her shoulders at 3 a.m. The laughter of women and children at the Ruth Ellery Foundation. Suddenly, the soft moment is interrupted by a distant silhouette. Outside the gated community, Paul Ellery stands still watching. His expression is unreadable, his posture tense, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He isn't here to reconcile. He's here with a plan. The music shifts, low, haunting notes crawling into the background. The peace Ruth has built is fragile, and a storm is gathering once again. The courtroom was silent, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. At the center table, Paul Ellery's trembling hands clutched the pen. Beside him, Marissa Ellery avoided everyone's gaze, her jaw locked tight. Across the room, Ruth Ellery sat between Vivian and attorney Grace Hollander, her posture calm, her eyes steady. No fear, no anger, only quiet strength. Finally, Paul signed the document. The pen scratched across the paper like the closing note of a long, bitter symphony. Marissa followed, her hands shaking as the ink dried beneath her fingers. The judge's voice broke the silence. "All claims are officially withdrawn. Full control remains with Mrs. Ruth Ellery." Paul lowered his head, unable to meet Ruth's gaze. This was it. Years of manipulation, betrayal, and greed, all reduced to one final signature. Ruth didn't speak. There was no gloating, no triumphant smile. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply the first real breath of freedom in years. As Paul and Marissa left the courtroom, the camera lingers on Ruth's face. There is no hatred, no bitterness, only acceptance. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about taking her life back. The camera slowly drifts across the balcony of Ruth's ocean view apartment. The sun is setting, painting the horizon in soft hues of gold and crimson. Ruth Ellery, now calmer and stronger than ever, kneels down by a small wooden planter box. With steady hands, she places a fragile young apple tree into the soil. Her movements are slow, deliberate, as though every grain of earth she touches carries the weight of her journey. Behind her, the gentle hum of the waves blends with the whispers of the evening wind. A faint smile graces her lips. This is not the face of a woman defeated. This is the face of someone reborn. As the camera pulls back, the world quiets. The sea breeze carries Ruth's soft voice, a voice that has endured storms, heartbreak, and betrayal, yet still holds unshaken strength. I didn't disappear. I rebuilt. And my story is just getting started. The shot lingers on the sapling as the wind gently rustles its leaves, a symbol of renewal, resilience, and a life reclaimed. Fade to black. Ruth Ellery's journey teaches us a powerful truth. Family isn't always about blood. It's about loyalty, love, and the people who truly stand by you when the storm comes. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those closest to us, but it's also true that we have the strength to rebuild, protect ourselves, and rise even stronger. No matter your age, your past, or your pain, it's never too late to take back control of your life. Like Ruth, you have the power to turn heartbreak into hope and betrayal into strength. If this story touched your heart, don't leave yet. There are countless real-life stories just like this one, stories of resilience, betrayal, hope, and redemption. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next emotional journey. Your support helps us share more powerful stories that inspire, heal, and remind us that no storm lasts forever.